Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Scrumptious Storytime. For a lot of you classes around the country, this is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving next week. Some of you have all of next week off, which is awesome. For those of you who don't know me and you got here through some other person, I want you to thank that person for letting you know about this storytelling. I am a storyteller. I am a children's book author. I am seeing a lot of schools that I've worked with over the years, a bunch of schools in Delaware, my home state, the UCLA Lab School, kiddos. This is me virtually. I'm going to see you live in January. I can't wait. Mrs. Friedman, your teacher, and Miss Terasa are some of my oldest friends and best supporters of my own writing. Schools in Colorado and California, schools in Michigan, old friends, new friends. Thank you so much. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you two stories. They're kind of related about eating, and one specifically about Thanksgiving. After I tell those stories, it's going to take me about 15 or 20 minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit about the thing that every writer I know hates: rewriting. Maybe you like rewriting, but if you're a writer who likes rewriting, you're one of the only writers who likes to rewrite. So I want to talk a little bit about my process of how I rewrite my books. I'm just noticing people are coming in as we're going along. And I'm thinking about doing this every month. I think every month I'm going to be doing this. So this is just a little gift for the people who have supported me or see me over the years. Children, parents, teachers, people of all over. I was born a long time ago. When I was born, I was the oldest in my family. I was an only child. I was so lucky to be an only child. How many of you are lucky enough to be an only child? And my life was perfect for exactly 1 year, because on the day I turned 1 year old, for my birthday gift, my mom and dad gave me not one, but two baby brothers. My mom and dad had twins on the day that I turned one. And at first, I was super happy. I looked up at my mom holding my little brother, Roberto. Roberto. I looked up at my dad holding my little brother, Enrique. Enrique. And I realized mom was holding Roberto and dad was holding Enrique, and nobody was holding me. I was only 1 year old. I started to do the math. I said, Mom. And she said, oh, honey. My mom's from Boston. She has a funny accent if you don't know it. She says, oh, honey, I'm holding little baby Roberto. I said, Dad. And he says, yo tengo Enriquito en mis brazos. You probably noticed something about my dad. He speaks Spanish because he's from Cuba. And I grew up speaking Spanish with my dad and English with my mom. But when I was 1 year old, and my brothers were 1 day old, I was mad and sad. I said, Mom, oh no, honey, Papa, no, mijito. And I started to cry. And so my mom very carefully put Roberto in the crib. And then she picked me up and I was, And then my dad had Henry in his arms and Henry was, And little Roberto in the crib, he was fine for a few minutes. He was just kind of sleeping. When all of a sudden, his eyes sort of peeled open and he looked up and he did little infant math. He looked at my dad holding his brother, my mom holding me, and he started screaming. And so my dad put little Enrique in the crib and he scooped up Roberto. And my Roberto was happy and I was happy. And little Henry was happy for a long time because he loved to sleep. So he was asleep. And about 3 or 4 hours later, he woke up and he looked. He got really mad. And so my mom put me down and picked up Henry, but then Henry got mad and mom got, and soon everybody was mad. Everybody was crying. And my dad picked up the phone. Now, if you don't speak Spanish, listen closely. You might figure out what my dad said on the phone. And if you don't speak Spanish and you don't figure it out, I'll tell you what my dad said. He called up the phone. He picked up the phone and he dialed. Does anybody know what dialing a phone is? He actually dialed a phone. Ask your parents, or maybe some of you ask your grandparents what dialing a phone is. And he said, Oye, abuela, es un desastre en la casa. Mamá está llorando. Enrique está llorando. Roberto está llorando. Antonio está llorando. Y ahora papá está llorando también. My dad called my grandmother, his mother, and said that little Enrique was crying, Roberto was crying, Antonio was crying, Mama was crying, and now Daddy was crying too. And he said, Mama, ayúdame. And my grandmother flew from Miami, Florida to Newcastle, Delaware, where I was living, not too far from Red Clay School District in Delaware. And she lived with us for 2 years. So my earliest memories are about my grandmother, Mimi, and she spoke to us in Spanish, and my dad spoke to us in Spanish, and my mom was learning English, and my brothers and I were speaking both Spanish and English. And my earliest memories of food was my grandmother's cooking. She cooked with a pressure cooker. I don't know if you know what a pressure cooker is. Not so many kids cook with pressure. Well, not so many parents cook with pressure cookers, but my grandmother, she had this huge pot with a big lid that screwed onto the pot. And on top of that lid was this little tiny, like black hat. And when you turned on the beans, the pressure would grow and the beans would cook super fast. And that little black hat would dance on top of the pot. And little tufts of steam would curl out and my brothers and I would stare at that little dancing hat on top of that pot for what seemed like 30 or 40 minutes. And the smell of the black beans would fill the kitchen. And my grandmother would put a great big pot of rice on the table and the beans and some sort of other dish. And then afterwards, we would have flan. Some of you might know what flan is. F-L-A-N. Your homework assignment for next week when you are off from school, as you're eating all the rest of the food you're going to eat, is find some flan, maybe at your local grocery store or at your nearest Mexican or Cuban restaurant. Flan is this soft brown custardy dessert covered in caramel. It is so delicious. So as a kid, my grandmother lived with us and she helped my parents cook for us, and things were perfect until my grandmother moved back down to Miami. My brothers and I were getting along a little bit better now, and we missed my grandmother, but we would talk to her on the phone a lot. My first day of kindergarten, I realized something interesting. Nobody else in my school spoke Spanish. And I started to walk around my school and try to figure it out. Now in Delaware, a lot of kids speak all kinds of languages. But when I was a kid, a long time ago, not anyone in my school spoke another language. And I went home one day, I was probably in first grade. I said, Papá, en la escuela no hablan español. He said, está bien, aquí en la casa hablamos los dos. I said, but Dad, nobody at school speaks Spanish. He says, yeah, but in our house, we speak both. And I did something that I'm a little ashamed of now. After a few months, I said, Dad, I don't want to speak Spanish anymore. ¿Por qué no? Tú puedes hablar los dos. No, Dad, I just want to speak English. I don't need to speak Spanish. And little by little, since I wasn't practicing Spanish with my dad, I began to forget it. And one day my grandmother called us on the phone and she was talking to my dad, and my dad was talking. He said, Abuela quiere hablar contigo. And I said, what? Your grandmother wants to talk to you. And I got the phone. And I said, oh, Mimi, how are you? What's going on? How are things in Miami, Florida? And she said, ¿qué? And then my grandmother said, and I said, what? And my grandmother started yelling. And she said, pásame el teléfono a papá. I said, what are you saying? My dad grabbed the phone and he started listening. He said, since you're not going to speak Spanish with me, you're going to speak Spanish with your grandmother. And the next thing I know, my brothers and I were flying on a plane all by ourselves to see our grandmother in Miami. And when I got to her house, she seemed a lot shorter than I remembered her. Did she shrink or did I grow or both? And when I got there, she threw all her arms around all three of us. And then she took us into the kitchen And she said, ¿Quién aquí tiene hambre? And my brother raised his hand. And my other brother raised his hand because they never cared that other kids didn't speak Spanish. They kept practicing their Spanish, but I didn't understand. I said to my brother, what did Mimi just say? She says, who's hungry? I raised my hand. And my abuela said, no vas a comer hasta que hablas español. She reached into the refrigerator. She took out some butter. She said, esto se llama mantequilla. I said, what? She said, mantequilla. And she walked over to me and she smeared some butter onto my face. I said, mantequilla? She said, muy bien. She reached into the fridge and she got a gallon of milk. She said, leche. I said, what? She unscrewed the top. She said, leche. I said, leche. She said, muy bien. She took out that piece of flan and I remembered what it was. She said, esto se llama flan. And I knew it. I said, flan. She said, flan. Muy bien. She gave me that flan and I ate some of that flan. And that summer vacation, I was there for about 4 weeks with my brothers. I wasn't allowed to eat anything unless I was able to say it correctly in Spanish. So we'd be at the table, there'd be a huge bowl of rice. I'd say, Mimi, give me the rice. She'd say, ¿Cómo? No entiendo. The rice. I'm pointing right at the rice. She knows what I'm talking about. No entiendo. And finally, she would say, pásame el arroz, por favor. And I'd say, pásame el arroz, por favor. She said, bueno, parece un gringo, pero ya te voy a dar el arroz. And she gave me the rice. And then the frijoles. And then little by little, I learned to speak Spanish again through the food at my grandmother's table. And then my cousins and uncles would appear and they would start telling jokes and everybody would laugh, but I had no idea why the joke was funny. And when everyone left, my grandmother would try little by little, oye, esto es chistoso por esto. And she would try to explain the joke and she would use hand gestures and I would try to figure it out. And by the end of those 4 weeks of eating food at my grandmother's table, of trying to understand the jokes that my family was saying, I began to speak Spanish again. And then I realized that it didn't really matter that I was the only kid who spoke Spanish in my school. I needed to be able to speak Spanish with my family in Miami. And every chance I got, I would visit my abuela. And the older I got, I began to write down some of those little moments, the little moments of that little tiny pressure cooker hat, the way she would make café con leche. She would make Cuban coffee. It was 1 part coffee, 3 parts milk, and 17 tablespoons of sugar. It was basically a cup of sugar. And so we would have café con leche in the morning. And she would make us eggs by cooking the bacon and cooking the eggs in the bacon. So I had all of these memories. But I was also lucky enough to go to my mom's Boston side of the family. My mom's family all comes from Ireland. I have these 2 cultures, my dad's Cuban family and my mom's Boston Irish family. One of the teachers at the lab school that I work, Miss Friedman, she's from Boston, and we have a lot of connections through that. And my mom would pile us into the station wagon, and we would drive about 8 hours north to see all of the uncles and all of the cousins in Boston. Some of you might be going on a long car ride next week for Thanksgiving, or maybe a plane ride. Some of you might be staying home. When we went up to my grandmother and grandfather's house, my mom's parents in Boston, it was totally different and almost exactly the same as my visits to Miami. The thing that was different is my mom has 4 brothers and sisters. So there's 4 uncles and aunties and a whole bunch of cousins. There's 15 cousins. Eily Rose is the oldest. When I was about 8 years old, she was about 18. And then there's Timmy, Julie, Jimmy, Johnny, Maddie, Patty, Stevie, Marky, Henry, Robbie, Antonio, all the way down, 15 cousins. And there were 10 uncles and aunties because they all had their wives and husbands. And all of the uncles and aunties got to sit at the great, big, fancy dining room table with candles and napkins made of cloth, not paper towels. And they would have actual glasses with water and milk and juice. And well, Uncle Tom had beer, but this is a family children's storytelling. I can't mention that. And so, and all of the uncles and aunties and the older cousins sat at that fancy dining room table. And all the younger cousins, of which I'm one, had to sit at little fold-up card tables in the den with paper plates and plastic forks. And we'd say, when do we get to sit at the big table? And my Uncle Pat, who was the youngest of the oldest, would say, when you get older. Oh, okay. Well, here's the thing. Every year, I would get older, and they would get older. And I'd say, Uncle Pat, when do I get to sit at the big table? He'd say, when you get older. And I'd be there with my little paper plates. And finally, I was about 12. I said, Uncle Pat, everybody gets older. When am I going to get to sit at the big table? He says, when somebody dies. Oh, Uncle Pat, when are you going to die? I'm not going to die for like 97 years. Oh, no. And now when we go back to Boston, all of my cousins have kids who sit on the floor with little paper plates on their laps. And they look up at me and they say, when do we get the fold-up card tables? And I say, when Uncle Pat dies. And they say, oh, when's Uncle Pat going to die? And Uncle Pat screams, not for another 97 years. Stop it, you little rug muncher. And so there we are in the thing. And then after we eat, we all clean up the kitchen. And then we have a humongous game of football. Maybe some of you play that. And it would be all 15 of the little cousins against all 10 of the older uncles and aunties. And you know who would always win? The older uncles and aunties. They were cheaters. They would cheat all the time. How many of you have old people who are cheaters in your family? Oh my gosh, my uncle's like jamming and my aunt was tripping and people were stealing. Oh, it was terrible. Hated it. And then afterwards, we would go back into the house and Aunt Joan made this thing that looked absolutely disgusting. It was called mud pie. And do you know what it looked like? Mud in a pie. It was just this great big dish, just full of like dirt. And she says, who wants some mud pie? My Aunt Joan has this lovely high voice. Who wants some mud pie? And all the little kids who never had it before said, we don't want any mud pie. We want something delicious. And Aunt Joan said, that's okay. And she cut into the mud pie. And underneath that layer of what looked like dirt was ice cream and Oreo cookies and syrup and whipped cream. She would just fire all kinds of things into this great big shell and cover it with crumpled up cookies. And it looked like dirt and mud. And we would eat it. And in my memory, it is the most delicious dessert I had ever had. And to this day, I still remember it. But the thing that was even more interesting about the mud pie is Aunt Joan would give a piece to all of the cousins. Do you remember how many cousins there were? 15 cousins. All of the uncles and aunties. Do you remember how many there were? 10. If you're younger, that's a hard math problem. What's 15 plus 10? If you're older, what is the square root of 125? Anyway, there they were, and they were all eating, and we had our mud pie. Oh, it was so delicious. And we'd say, Aunt Joan, can we have some more? She'd say, of course, you can have some mud pie. And she would cut another piece of mud pie for everybody. And we would eat that mud pie. Aunt Joan, can we have some more? She'd say, of course. And she would cut another piece of mud pie. It was magic mud pie. Now, to this day, I don't know if she had like 3 mud pies that she kept bringing out from the freezer, or that one mud pie was just never, there was always mud pie left in the pan. And then after everyone had 3 pieces, now we were so full, we couldn't even believe it. There was still more mud pie. She'd put it on the ground and the little dog would come and eat the rest of the mud pie. And the mud pie is a tradition in our family. Aunt Joan is super old now. And she doesn't make the mud pie anymore. She makes her daughter, Eily Rose, make the mud pie. Eily Rose, the oldest cousin, is now super old like me. And she makes the mud pie. And Eily Rose makes a really good mud pie. But it's not a magic mud pie. It can't feed 40 people over and over again. And it doesn't quite taste as good as Aunt Joan's mud pie. But don't tell Aunt Joan that, because she would be mad. And don't tell Eily Rose that, because if you did, she won't give me mud pie next week, and that would be sad. Children, teachers, those are 2 stories of both sides of my family, the way we eat. My Cuban grandmother doesn't celebrate Thanksgiving. That's not a holiday we have in Cuba, but she celebrated food in different ways. And my mom's family celebrated in a different way. Next week, as you're enjoying your food, as you're enjoying your family, think about what one writer does. I always carry my little journal with me whenever I see my family. I try to spend a lot of time listening to them and talking to them, but sometimes when I have a little moment, I write down small moments about things that I notice. That little hat on the pressure cooker that my grandmother had, Aunt Joan's magic mud pie, the way that Uncle Pat kept joking about when he was going to die. Uncle Pat is still alive. He hasn't quite reached 97 yet. I don't know when that's going to happen. And this is the thing that I do with some of the books that I have. Over the years, I've written a bunch of books about my family. I wrote a book about La Noche Buena, how we celebrate Christmas. I wrote a book about one of the jokes that my family told me. So those are the two stories I wanted to share with you. Children and teachers, these are story starters, jumping off points that you all can think about. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk just for a couple minutes about the rewriting process, and then we'll have a little time for some Q&A. So teachers, if you want to start throwing some questions in the chat from some of your students, if they have any, I'll do it. I'll sort of do it that way. All right. So I know very personally some of the teachers that are on the call right now, and I know that they make you rewrite the things you're writing. Kids, I'm going to give you a little secret. They do that because they're mean. They get paid more money every time you have to rewrite something. That's not true. Not true. There is an author I know and love who says that writing is rewriting. Maybe there's some kids out there who love to rewrite, but rewriting is a really hard thing. I want to share with you one thing. This Barking Mouse, my first book, was rewritten 7 times. This book, A Mango in the Hand, was rewritten 16 times. This book, a simple, lovely book about a meal that my grandmother served me at Christmas time, was rewritten 22 times. This is my shortest book. It only has about 400 words, and I only had to rewrite this one 11 times. Kids, do you think I liked rewriting my books that many times? Nope, not at all. But teachers, here's the key. Here's the secret. This is the thing that's going to help all of you. My publisher says, I will pay you money if you rewrite your books. So teachers, all you need to do is pay your kids for their rewrites. Kids, I'm kidding. I'm actually not kidding. To get to the point where a publisher pays you to write books, you have to rewrite a lot. I know a lot of you students are athletes. I know a lot of you play basketball and you play volleyball and you do all kinds of things. And in those games, I know you love to play those games. You have to practice a lot to get to that point. My daughter's playing volleyball right now, and she has to practice hitting the ball over the net. She has to practice. And then when she gets to the game, it's fun because she can hit it over the net. So in some ways, the practice part of writing is the rewriting. That's the practice part. It's not fun. But then when you get to a finished product, you get to something that you can share with your family. You get to color it in and put it on the walls on maybe a sharing night at your school. That's the amazing part of it. So what I want to do now is I'm going to look through some of the chats if I can figure it out, because, you know, I'm super old. I don't even know how this works. And I'm going to figure out, let's see. Rachel, why am I not seeing? Oh, I know. I'm hitting more. Show chat. I'm funny. Here we go. Chat. Here I go. Got it. All right. So hello from Heritage in Delaware, Heritage School in Delaware. I'm so glad. I know some of you are on your lunch break. So thank you for sharing your lunch break, Heritage Schools. I really appreciate it. Why didn't she use some more brown foods for the mud pie? That's funny. That's a question from one of the teachers. You know what? I might have to rewrite that part of the story and figure that out. Oh, let's see. Oh my gosh. What did I write my college essay about? My high schooler student staff wants to know. The preschoolers have gone home. My college essay. Okay. So those of you who are very young, college, when you get older into high school, you think about going to college, and often you have to write an essay about yourself, actually. And I do remember the first college essay that I can remember was I had to write, what 3 things would I bring to a desert island? I think one could be a book, one could be a piece of music, and one could be something else. And I forget what I wrote. but it's funny. The fourth graders in Delaware would like to know, how many books have I written? Oh, we're going to get a few for our classroom library. That's so sweet. Thank you, fourth graders from Delaware, asking. I've written a bunch of books. The last book that I just wrote is called My Name is Cool, and that just came out in August. And all of my books are available on Amazon. You can go to Amazon and get them, or you can link to my books from my website. I have another book called A Mango in the Hand. It's about food. I have two books about food here. And I have the last book that I have is called The Barking Mouse. So they're appropriate. In some ways, they're appropriate for all ages. The Mango in the Hand book is probably for slightly older kids. The My Name is Cool book is slightly for younger kids, but they're both really fun and really funny. And then the book that I have for older readers I'm really proud of is a chapter book, my first chapter book called My Name is Cool. And there are 18 stories in this book. Some of them are about fighting with my family. There's a story about La Llorona from Mexico, a scary story that I learned in Mexico. So those books are available on Amazon. I have other books that I've written that aren't as easily available, but I'm really proud of these books as well. I was asked to write a bunch of nonfiction titles for a publisher here in California. So I wrote a book called Everyone Pays Taxes. It is not one of my bestsellers, but you got to learn this. Everyone pays taxes. And I've written a bunch of some books about money, then and now. How do governments spend money? I'm not quite sure how I got on that thread. And then I wrote a book that I'm proud of as well called U.S. Immigration Today. I've written over 20 books. I only have about 4 of them that are available on Amazon right now, but thank you for that question. Why do you write stories about my family? Miss Kessler asked. Miss Kessler, the answer is, in some ways, kind of lazy. I know my family. It's easy for me to think about my family. So I am huge admirers of people who create great big fictional worlds. That Harry Potter books are amazing. The Rick Riordan books are amazing. I love these books. And I can see the craft and the time and the dedication and the number of rewrites those writers have to do. And maybe someday I will write something like that. But really what happens is I love my family so much that I want you all to meet them. There's a little joke in the story about the Thanksgiving story where Uncle Pat said, I'll die when I'm 97. Well, he's in his late 80s now. And hopefully he'll live to 97, but who knows? And so some of you got to meet my uncle through my stories. So in some ways, my grandmother Mimi, the one who cooked me all those amazing meals, if she were alive today, she'd be one of the oldest people ever. She'd be 125 years old. So every time I tell this story about my family members, I keep them alive a little bit. So that's one of the reasons why I write about my family. The third graders ask, what am I thankful for? You know, I'm thankful for so many things. I get to share my stories and laugh with students all around the country. And so it's funny, the pandemic was a tremendous disaster, but it made Zoom something that we can do. I have traveled to Delaware to tell stories, but I live in Los Angeles. And so now I get to travel across the country to Delaware and to a school here in Los Angeles and to schools in Colorado through this technology. So as much as I'm not happy about technology in some ways, I am thankful for that. I'm thankful for my family. And I'm super thankful that you all joined me on the Zoom today. I want to keep it at 30 minutes because I know a lot of you have school and classes and some of you are on lunch break. You can get my books on Amazon. I have I'm going to be sending teachers a link to a coupon I have on my courses. We're going to do a Black Friday sale. So if you're interested, and also my picture book is going to be on sale too for Black Friday. Thank you so much, Lisa. It's so great to see you and all the rest of you. I'm going to do it again in December 14th, right before Christmas break. I will be telling some holiday stories as well. And thank you, teachers around the country, old friends, new friends, for joining me. More information is on my website, antoniosacre.com. Thank you so much. Oh, yes, Snowy Story Time, December 14th at 9 a.m. Pacific. That's the next one. Adios. Take care. Thank you very much. Ahí están. They're doing YMCA in Delaware. That's awesome. Oh, my gosh. My old friend, Lisa Gonza. She's one of my I went to high school with her. That's incredible. Thank you so much, everyone.